everyone. My name is Nick Marshall, and I'm the Manager of Exhibitions and Programs at the George Eastman Museum. Welcome to today's virtual gallery talk with artist Bea Nettles and Stephen B. and Janice G. Ashley, Associate Curator Jamie Allen. Before we get started, I want to thank you all for joining. We're very, very encouraged by the response we've received from so many of our members and people across the globe as we've shifted many of our regularly scheduled in-person programs to online webinars. It's been really exciting to see the versatility this platform allows us and the reach we are able to have with it. Our next live webinar will be July 10 at 1 p.m. Lisa Hostetler, Eastman Museum's curator in charge of the Department of Photography, and artist Joshua Rashad McFadden will discuss historic and contemporary images that have become iconic, deconstruct how they came to be so, and strategies for looking thoughtfully at the barrage of images we see every day. So keep an eye out for more information about this and other programs happening online by subscribing to our newsletter if you haven't signed up for it already. If you go to our website, there's an easy form at the bottom of the page where all you have to do is enter your email address and you can select what type of updates you'd like to receive from the museum. If you have questions throughout today's talk, please submit them through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You'll notice that there are two buttons at the bottom. There's one that's called chat and one that's Q&A. Some of you have already been using the chat function to talk and say hello. We love that. But if you do have any questions specifically for Jamie or Bea, please use the Q&A function. It's just easier for us to track questions that way. That way we don't have to toggle back and forth and they get buried in the chat. So at the end of the presentation, we'll go through some of the questions with Jamie and Bea. If there are a large volume of questions coming in, we may not be able to get to them all. So I do apologize in advance if we don't get to your question. We will be recording today's webinar and putting it on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. So if you'd like to go back and watch again or share with others, you're able to access it along with our other webinars and video content through YouTube. There's actually other content with Jamie and Bea already on YouTube. So if you want to dig deeper and you haven't had a chance to check those out, there's some great stuff on there. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Jamie Allen.
Thanks, Nick. I'm just so pleased to be here today to talk to Bea about her books, which I think are a really important part of her 50-year career. You know, I probably one of the things you're best known for is what's behind me here, which is your tarot deck. And I think of those, your card decks and your books kind of in tandem, but really important pieces of your working practice. So I'm really glad to be able to bring this information and share more about these works with our audience. Just a couple of quick notes. Something we wouldn't have been able to do in the gallery is that we've made some videos of some of the books. And so as we're sharing today, I'm going to be showing some videos of just kind of turning the pages or exploring some of those books. And I just wanted to make a quick note that we only had one opportunity to do this as I was taking down the exhibition, and the colors are a little bit off in some of the videos, so just keep that in mind. But I'm trying to show all of them in tandem with still images that are very accurate in color. So just that quick note. And I also just wanted to say thank you to Bea for allowing us to film those books and share her books in that format, just to create better access to those materials, and also to the Rare Book and Manuscript Library at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign for allowing us to film their copy of the book Hair Loss, which we'll get to in a little bit. So without further ado, Bea, let's just jump right in.
Okay.
All right. So so after you graduated 1970 with your master's degree. And I know that you had a brief period where you were making binder books and kind of starting into this bookmaking format. But when you're at the Tyler School of Art in Pennsylvania is when you really start getting into the book format where you're creating books in editions of 100 or something like that, and using the printing skills that you have to make books. So I'm just curious, do you remember why you started making books, and what was the impetus behind some of these early books?
Well, the very first books you were alluding to were actually 3-ring binders. I started those in 1970 because I didn't know how to bind a book. And also I didn't have very much time, and I found I could work on one collage at a time, put them together in the book format. So I didn't totally use the book for its sequential potential for a while. But in those early 70s, I was also in Rochester some of the time, also involved with Light Impressions, which was my husband's business at that point, which was distributing photographic books. So I was surrounded by books, thinking about books. When I moved to Philadelphia to teach at Tyler, they actually had an offset press. They had a little process camera, and William Larson was interested in books. So I was surrounded by people who were thinking along those lines. And another reason that I wanted to do books was what we're seeing on the screen here. I really, really wanted to do some collaborative work with my mother's poetry. And that required words, and it lent itself to being put together as books. So I think you're going to show a video here from the Imaginary Blowtorch, which, let's see, I had to write all these dates down, it was so long ago. 1973.
Right.
And this is a combination of offset printing, which you're turning right now, was printed on a very cheap offset press, like actually just a shop press in Philadelphia. And then to make it a little less flat looking, I started screen printing on some of the pages. I also added tissue papers, screen prints on Mylar, other hand-done embellishments. Now, the palm tree, for example, I had to make 100 of those because the edition is 100, so it was quite a lot of screen printing. But I wanted that transparency. And this is because the first book that I did ever of my mother's poetry was a one-of-a-kind book, and it had a lot of very special collages in it, transparent pages, even fabric pages, that sort of thing. But I couldn't make 100 copies of it. So this was my efforts to adapt a very unique book into what still is a fairly unique book. There were only 100 copies of the Imaginary Blowtorch made. So this is her poetry and my imagery.
So tell us a little bit about that. In previous programs, we've talked about your collaborating with your children, but in this case, it predates that, and you're collaborating with your mother, whose background is very much in English and literature and all of that. So why collaboration with your mother? What made you really want to start pairing your images and her writing?
Okay, well, she sent me the first poem that she ever wrote that I ever saw in 1970, and it just absolutely blew me away. It was so good. And I said, Mom, you've got to keep writing. And she was a 50-year-old woman at that point. And she did. She kept writing for 20 years. She kept writing poetry, sending it to me. It was at that point, she'd gone back to grad school as a 50-year-old woman as well, gotten a degree in English, had begun to teach community college English courses. So she was my role model in a lot of ways. She had 5 children, became a college teacher, was an artist, writing poetry. So I really wanted to honor that. But also she got a real late start in it. And she had no real way or means or even interest in publishing her own poetry. But I thought it was very good and I wanted it done. So I did it.
One of the things I really love about these books, which again, we cannot share in an exhibition format in a way that you kind of get a sense of in this video, but the way that the images recombine with the transparent pages, the see-through pages, and that kind of collage element in a way, which in my mind predates your books in all of your work. So in your paintings and in your photographs, you're already making collages and combining images to make more complex things. And in some of your earlier binder books, I know the one at the Center for Creative Photography actually has see-through pieces as well, that as you're kind of going through those, you get that recombine or a little peek through at something else.
Yeah.
How did you see that work with the viewer interacting with the book? Is that something you felt was controlled in this manner? Because you talked earlier about the sequencing potential of a book. But did you feel like you were controlling that, or did you want the viewer to have some say in what they were seeing?
Well, they obviously could go back and forth and move a page back and forth. There's one a ways back. We don't have to go back through the video, but that's a wave. And it's like the wave coming onto the shore and covering the words. There's another that's functions as a garden fence or a wall between two poems. And one, I believe this is in this book. The one is a very romantic poem, and the other is about Susanna in the garden. And so the page itself functions as a hedge. I like the architecture of books, the tactile quality, and I think letting viewers experience this is a plus.
Yeah.
Go at their own pace.
So one of the things we wanted to do was actually share one of your mom's poems that you felt kind of was apropos to our current moment. For those who are watching, I'm going to put the text up here on the screen so you can read along if you would like.
Okay, this poem is called The Imaginary Blowtorch, and she wrote this in 1973. I think it really applies to the nightmare that we find ourselves in. I'm sure everyone's experiencing waking up in the middle of the night and having the whole situation hit them. And how do you get back to sleep? How do you deal with it? That's what she's talking about. But this was long before this. This was actually written as a menopausal woman would deal with night terrors. There's a phase in menopause that most women have where you wake up in the night and it just seems like the end of the world. Unfortunately, that passes usually in about a year. Now, I didn't get that because I was in my 30s and she was in her 50s, but now I do, and I've gone through that, and I realized what she was writing about. But I picked this because I thought it applied also to what we're all dealing with right now. It's called The Imaginary Blowtorch, which is the name of the entire collection and the book itself. And I'm looking like I'm holding some sort of something. That's actually me. I don't want to spoil the image, but I was trying to push the remote control thing on the camera, and it fired. So that's a long stick, but that's also functioning as my imaginary blowtorch, protecting my little heart behind me. That's me. It's always 3 a.m. in the clearing in the briar patch of the mind. One-way tunnels lead out all around, converging on another clearing where something monstrous sits, waiting. It is the swallowing woman, the one who will not die. But you know this, and so you say to your other self, the earned companion, the listener who always gets the point, a tough character if there ever was one. Out with your imaginary blowtorch now and burn those tunnels shut. And when daylight comes, you're still holding out, not a scratch on you, only just a little bit blue on a green morning. That poem still gives me chills to read it. You've got it within you to burn those tunnels shut and get on with life.
I really enjoyed getting to know your mother's poetry through the process of making this exhibition, as well as seeing how you worked in tandem with her. So I think this idea of menopause is a good jump, and we're going to jump a long ways in time for those watching. Yeah. Partially because in the 70s you make a lot of these kind of series of 100 or so books at a time, and we're going to come back to Mountain Dream Tarot, the card deck, towards the end, and that'll be a jump back in time. But so this idea of menopause creeps back into your work around 1989, 1990, and that idea of, at that moment in time, you've now made all this work about being a mother and having young children and balancing work and life, and you've made, at that point, a lot of trade books like Flamingo in the Dark, and life's lessons comes in around the same time. But so you're really now have had time to deal with the fact that you're a mother. And now you start to, in my view, in your work, you start to look at aging and that process for women and kind of maturation.
Yeah.
Which are tough subjects in art. Things that not everyone talks about, even in life.
For sure.
Life, right? So
Yeah.
what brought you to this at this moment in time for in your work?
Well, this triple portrait sort of sums it up. That's me in the middle as the full moon, and my mother as the waning moon, and then my daughter as the new moon. And my daughter, Rachel, was just about to have her first period. And so that's what brought this topic back up again, was thinking about myself at that age, and then myself at this age, and then looking to my mother further down the line. So these are the 3 ages of a woman's life, the 3 stages of a woman's life. And below I have bread. At that point I was a bread baker, and it's yeasted bread. And so in the first bowl, it's just in the bowl, it hasn't risen. In the middle, it's punched down. I love the way that looks like a belly button when you punch the bread, and it looks like a soft belly. And then the third is a round bread with these sort of moon-shaped slices. So it's comparing women's lives and the fertility and bodies also. I think the belly button stands in for the whole thing.
Right. And that kind of, I also think of the loaf of bread at the end kind of starting to dry up because it's in the air.
Yeah.
So you actually turned this work into a small kind of pamphlet, I'd almost say. So here's the front and the back. And again, you're pairing it with your mother's poetry.
Right. I've got to read this one out quickly because it's the same thing. It's the 3 moon sisters. So that's how I got the idea. The full moon has gone mad and slid down to the windy places where the dog howls go to die. Then for a spell rules Hecate, the dark. With what relief and always some surprise, we see you reappear, amber sliver, Mona Lisa of the western skies. There's actually a Mona Lisa out there. There was last night. I don't know if it was the old or the new moon, but anyway, it's a slice of the moon.
You're kind of coming back into
yeah.
being.
So I made this little book to go with the triptych. If it were to be ever shown, it was shown once in a faculty show. And the little book was made so that you could slip it into your pocket discreetly and read about these phases of woman's life, but not like in any obvious way, because it's such a sort of a forbidden topic. People don't tend to talk about menstruation, menopause, all of that. It also was made to look like little booklets that I used to find as a kid that were thrown in the ditches along the roadside by fortune tellers. It was their way of advertising, drumming up business. Gypsies would be in the area. This is down in Florida, in the rural part of Florida. And those little booklets were always interesting to me. So it's a secret book, basically.
It does have that very slip it in your pocket kind of side.
Read it later. Yeah.
Yeah, like something that you might have in your bedroom that you got at school about this mysterious process that's happening to your body that you hide in your drawer, right?
And those are so tacky too. They were so awful. But anyway, I'm writing in first person about what it's like. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in the book, you're actually pairing those same images also with text about this process. And I guess I don't think of it as educational in the sense of what's about to happen to your body, but in the sense of experience of being able to really have empathy towards what is happening to people's body as they age.
Yeah.
So around the same time period, your printing process changes quite a bit too. So you've gone from those 1970s kind of offset books, the books that you're putting screen printing into and really hand assembling, to something like this, which is a little bit, in my head, more mass produced.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I could make quite a few, except folding and producing, and I got bored and I didn't make that many, but they're still there to be folded if you want help.
Yeah, one thing that I couldn't show you very well in the video, I did try at some point, but this booklet is one sheet of paper that kind of all neatly folds together. It's pretty amazing in the sense that anybody could make a book like this if they really wanted to on their home printer.
I teach kids how to do this. Yeah.
So then you follow that shortly with the 28 days card deck, and just to give everybody a size of the card deck, I'll hold one up here in my hands. And again, talking about that process, but in a very literal day by day of a woman's supposed cycle, although everybody's different. Here's what's happening, and comparing that to images, and the imagery kind of goes between the body, flowers, I'm trying to think, there's sculptures in there. How did you pair those symbols with what you felt was happening throughout that month for women?
Well, I had to give it a lot of thought. First of all, I wanted to illustrate the menstrual cycle, but in a book, but then I thought a book has a beginning and an end, but a card deck doesn't. And neither does your period for quite a long time. Yeah, thanks, Jamie. And so you could hold them and you put the one to the back and keep going through, and you would basically shuffle through the months, through the cycles. And after day 28, you pick up day 1 again, and it would just keep going. So it was a perfect solution to illustrating a cycle with no beginning or end. Eventually there's an end, but it didn't seem like it at the time. And then I did use flowers. I tried not to make it too graphic. I wanted men also to be able to look at it and find it okay to look at. The apple is a big symbol because, of course, you've got Eve, and she was the first woman who had a period. And there's humor in it as well. There's some pretty funny parts, so you can laugh about it.
Well, I put up my favorite card there on the screen, where I can't find her now in the deck, and on my screen she's covered up, but the one that says the curse dates back to Eve.
Yeah.
Made to menstruate as retribution by God.
Yeah.
To me, there's a lot of humor there. And
well, that's the way it says in the Bible, you know, in pain and suffering, you will be made to bear children and so forth. It was definitely all her fault. Yeah.
So this idea of like putting images in sequences, and then deconstructing them and reconstructing them, I think is a really good segue into your seasonal turns book.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and set the video for this one, because it's hard to explain what it is without seeing it. But so this is actually, and this is one where the video is a little blown out at times, but it's actually a little box, a little plastic box.
It's a floppy disk box, if anyone remembers those. But what's so cool is to open that box, you actually had to pry it open. It makes sort of a cracking sound. Yeah. The first image was an egg being cracked. I didn't plan it that way, but I realized it was really good, so I left it that way. This is the sequence of spring. There's 7 images across, and then when you close it and flip it, there's the other 7. 7 more. So it can be read in any order that you want. It's printed green. It doesn't look that way in the video, but it's the green for the spring and then the red for the summer, fall, and winter. And each one is one of the 4 seasons, 14 images per season, in a boxed set. And I've worked with the seasons in many, many different ways, and they turn up frequently in my work. It's a way to convey the passage of time.
It is. I like that there's kind of this hatching, like that the imagery also conveys time, hatching, and like at the end there's some very cold kind of death feeling images as well. But so we've talked about this, but I want other people to be able to hear that art and being an artist isn't always easy. So at this moment in your working career, you were actually struggling to produce art for a period of time.
Yes.
And so can you take us through a little bit? And I had it here, where'd it go? Of turning 50.
Yeah.
And kind of that process of putting images and sequences and how it led to kind of a rebirth in your work that then later is Return Trips?
Yes, sure. Turning 50, the one you're holding up, it came together extremely quickly. I was at a place called Penland School in North Carolina. And once I got the idea to do this book about celebrating the fact that I was turning 50, I had the past, the present, the future, those three parts of time. And the images came together quickly. And then I struggled for a couple of years after that. I couldn't top it. I couldn't think what to do next. I kept working with pairing images and then pushing them into triptychs and even a little further, but I was struggling. And once I named Seasonal Turns, once I named this, it went together in a day. It was so annoying because you like those periods to last a little bit longer than a day, but I had bits of it already sort of paired, maybe even 3 in triptychs, but I didn't know what they were until I could bring the title, Seasonal Turns, to mind, and then it went, just like turning 50, it all came together. So there's something about working subconsciously and then naming it. Once I name it, I can usually do it. Not always. It doesn't always happen that fast, but this case it did.
Right, and so I like the idea that in both of these works, you're gathering images, and again, working very in collages, looking at how images speak to one another, how the symbols in the images, so like we were just talking about with Seasonal Turns, how the images represent something like a season or the passage of time or aging. So using those symbols in tandem with each other to create a visual sequence that that one can literally read if they wanted to, but by bringing their own kind of impressions of images and ideas to those photographs and to the sequences and what's happening within those sequences.
Yeah, I've had people compare it to haiku poetry, you know, just there's no words in these. And,
right.
Yeah.
Which is a total turn on something we're going to talk about in a minute. But
okay.
But first, I want to get. I just wanted to quickly show the Observer because again, it's a very quick but poignant book.
This is probably my favorite book in the sense it's so tiny but so powerful, and it was also a fluky kind of accident. I was going to just put, I did pick pictures of me at every decade from 10 to 50, and I had cut the eyes out to put on the cover of the book. And this picture that you're turning right now, those eyes, or the cutout that I'd used, fell against something else. And I thought, wow, I can see through the eyes to another decade. And I thought, well, that's more interesting than just plain pictures. So I lined it up, and my eyes all line up. I have a beauty mark too, which helps to register it. And you see back and forth. You're continuing to see through to the 10-year-old eyes on the one side. And it's creepy at the end. I mean, that's that little 10-year-old still in the 50-year-old body. And I could add a few more decades now, but as you go back and forth, and I think we're going to get the hairdo picture here. Yeah, you've got all these different ages in you, and they're still in me. When I get on my bicycle and I'm riding, even wearing the helmet, I feel like my hair is flying in the wind, and I'm 10 years old. So I still have my 10-year-old in me.
I love that concept that the individual that you are at any given moment in time stays with you and is already there for future you.
Mm-hmm. I didn't invent that. Gloria Steinem talks about having your older you,
right,
leading you down the path, and my older me is already here too. This was, by the way, that was done at the in Philadelphia. They invited me to do a book in a print shop that the students help out, and it was a real privilege to be invited to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to also talk about hair loss.
Yeah.
because again, falling on difficult times for your own working practice and your own life, you were diagnosed with cancer, and this is your response to being able to produce any work at that moment in time.
Right, right.
So I'm going to go ahead and play this video as well.
Okay.
So that people can get it. And again, just very simple sequence, but a powerful subject that maybe a lot of people might shy away from looking at or acknowledging happens, or even wanting to talk about their own personal experience. And I've had multiple people tell me it was great to be able to relate to something in an artwork that had happened to them, just through simply seeing something this simple and acknowledging that, yes, other people have shared experiences, and that it's not always through a group therapy session or something like that that you can talk about these things.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about this book, and I just want to point out that the end papers on this book do contain your hair. So it would be great if you want to talk about that as well.
Okay. Well, it took 5 years before I did this book after going through breast cancer. Some things you just have to think about. And I didn't do much addressing this issue. I think there's one other image that I did. But during the process of going through chemo and losing my hair and growing it back and teaching full time also, I was able to set up a view camera with Type 55 film, and I did one portrait a month. And that's about all the creative stuff I managed to do. But I kept the camera in the same spot. And I realized this book has all the images, even before the hair, after the hair grew back in. I forgot that happened in this particular book. The hair fell out after the first chemo treatment. While I was visiting my daughter, she was away in grad school, and she was studying textiles, and she had the ability to make handmade paper. And so I scooped a whole bunch of it up, and I left it with her, and I said, put this in some paper for me, embed it in paper, and I'll figure out what to do with it later. And so that's the end pages. And I felt it was important to let my daughter do something, like to have some kind of, I don't know, some kind of way she could help me through this. So making the paper helped her. And as soon as I got back from that trip, I still had sort of ratty amount of hair left. I had my son give me a buzz cut. So he helped me too. They both, my son and my daughter, kind of helped me out with this hair loss. But it was more traumatic than I thought it would be, because I've usually worn my hair pretty short. I didn't think it'd be any big deal, but it's another story when you're in the shower and it starts to cling to you and just fall out and stick on everything. It was pretty intense. The book itself is brown leather. It's a very soft, almost skin type leather. So again, it's a very tactile experience to pull it out, to open it, hold it in your hands, and then experience it. And you I don't know if we've seen it already, but I really like the accordion bookbinding style, so that you can lay books out and show them in cases, because that's always a challenge when you're trying to exhibit books.
Right, when we exhibited the book, I'll go back, it was kind of in this format where you could kind of see all those things kind of splayed out that way. Mm-hmm. This book also represents a moment where you're starting to make more hand-bound artist books. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the changeover in your work? Because you start to really, at this point in time, make fewer and fewer printed single photographs. You're working on return trips, but that kind of comes to a close. And you ramp up your handmade artist book practice.
Yeah, there are a lot of factors at this point in time. First of all, I learned how to bind books, which was good. And actually, when I got the diagnosis of breast cancer, I had just returned from a conference called the Paper and Book Intensive. It was the first time I'd ever gone to one of those. And they've been a very important sort of gathering place for me for many times with other working professionals. So I also took other workshops as well, and honed my skills, because I wanted to start teaching at a more adult level than just folding paper. So I learned to bind books. I found I really was fairly good at it, really liked it. But you don't want, at least I don't want to make more than maybe 10 or 15 of something that's that fancy and stressful. Also, if you're going to try to make them all the same in additions. So I had the skills. I don't know that I'd said everything I wanted to say in offset books, photo books, but I still have a lot of those books, and they're back when you printed offset books, you had to make 1,000 or you were crazy. Just the economics. Now I make books, if I make them at all, using Lulu or something like that, print on demand, so that I make just what I use or what I can sell or what I can find homes for and so forth.
Right. So sort of like, so the early practice, you're making, 100 or so by hand through
Yep.
very physical printing processes. And then by the 90s, you're making things that you can kind of
Right.
have somebody else print, but you have to have 1,000 of them.
That's right. And then you have to distribute them and sell them.
Right.
Yeah.
And often artists are stuck with boxes of books under their beds and things like that.
That's right.
And
A
then,
lot of it's practical. It's about skills, acquiring skills. Before I had the offset skills, I was going to little print shops and stapling things together. They were like zines.
right.
And then as I actually learned to run an offset press as I began to print. And then as I got NEA grants, I had money that I could actually put into dream books, books that were really nice, then I'd make 1,000, 2,000 of them. And then digital came along, and I still was printing offset though. And then there comes a point where my last offset book, I'm trying to remember if it was turning 50, or I think it might have been Seasonal Turns was the last thing I did in offset. And then I think so. And then it's like you just use Epson printers or whatever. So you go back to more unique and limited edition just because of the sheer cost of it.
Right.
Yeah. Or Lulu, which is a different thing altogether.
Right. So I wanted to jump to Fate being a necessity. One, because I love how it bridges sort of the cards that you make as well as the books, the accordion style. But it's a book that you had the opportunity to make because of a residency in Ireland.
Iceland.
I'm sorry, Iceland. I meant Iceland. Thank you. But I love also the richness of materials that are involved in the book, and that you're returning a little bit to the idea of going to mythology and storytelling, which is something that crops up early in your work with Venus and Susanna and all the different characters. So now you have these new characters inspired by other cultures that are entering your work.
And those are actually the Moon Sisters again. It's the 3 phases of a woman's life. It's the past, the present, and the future. And in this case, the Icelanders, they reverse the order. I mean, the future is the young one rather than the old one. I thought that was pretty interesting.
That is interesting. So this is one of several books that you make while you're in Iceland. How do you arrive at an idea while you're at a residency? Like,
I read a lot of their literature. I read a lot of sagas before I went, and then I checked things out in the library, mythology. I didn't want to watch TV anyway, and it was light all the time. It was during June, so it never got dark. There was plenty of time to read and do research when I wasn't making things. So I was there 2 months. I did a book a week rather. I did 8 projects, Icelandic myths, and plants, but mainly I stuck to the mythology. And this one is fascinating. These are the fates also. They're the women who in Greek mythology they cut the cord, cut your life off. That's atropos, atrophy. The woman who cuts you is atropos, so you're done. Here the women braided 3 twines together. But it's the same idea. They lived at the bottom of the tree of life, and they'd come out and determine your fate by braiding, how long your life would be.
Just where the braid ends is when your life ends.
Yeah, or when you run out of yarn,
The string is gone.
Yeah, like those of us making masks at home, I have no elastic, so I got to come up with some other you know, some other way to do it.
Right. Let's go ahead then and talk a little bit. So we had a program that was just for members where we talked about your gravestone poetry, but I wanted to address it here because I think it's a really interesting, I kind of alluded to this earlier, where you had one book, this one where it's all images that are recording ideas, but here in your gravestone poetry books, it's all words that are images, but images of words that are relaying something that in my mind is very visual.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a little bit about how your gravestone poetry got started?
Sure. I wish I could read you a little, but I don't think I've got it right here on hand. Stone cipher is the 4 seasons. It's how to decipher the seasons. And the way this began, this is the first of the books. I don't know if this will hold on long enough, but this is spring, May Day, ruby flowers ring lavender stone maze. And I can hardly read that, but shepherd shields, furry newcomer lamb. Those are all last names that I find on gravestones. And it started at Salem College. I was there as a resident artist and walked around their graveyard. They had one on campus. And I came across the stone Southern. And I thought that was so apropos for someone to be called Southern who was buried in the South that I took a photo of it. Then I began collecting a few down there, but didn't think any more about it. When I got back to Champaign-Urbana, it was months before I went to the graveyard on our campus and began to collect words that interested me. Again, they were only last names and only nouns, verbs, and adjectives. And I realized I could write phrases. Then the idea was, okay, let's see if we can write the 4 seasons. So here's fall's nice wander. And Ford driver.
Force.
Yeah, Ford driver fears rear fender bender. A lot of them are very funny, but those are all last names. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you've now made quite a series of those, and they address, for our visitors that may not have had a chance to see the exhibit or might not be as familiar with your work, they address the seasons, the cardinal directions. You've made kind of a war and peace out of veterans' names, American veterans' names. Dante Enters Hell, the retelling of Dante's Inferno.
Yeah. Persephone, the myth of Persephone.
Right, the myth of Persephone, and World's Mother Way, which is Eve and Punch and Judy and Hester from the Scarlet Letter. Mm-hmm. Hopefully I got all that right.
You did. Plus a lot of card decks in between.
A lot of, and I actually have one here, a little Stone Turner Jr. And each of the card decks also has their homonyms, their famous pairs like Ginger and Roger, or Salt and Pepper.
Click and clack.
Right, and things that I was surprised that you could find on gravestones.
Yeah, me too.
So, and just like the absurdity of what people's names are, and being able to go out and collect enough that you can make these really visceral visual poetry out of those very simple things, just the gravestones.
Yeah, I've got almost 7,000 now.
Yeah.
And I'm still doing it. Even that's a good place to go when you can't be with crowds, you know?
That's right. I've enjoyed going to Mount Hope here. So I'll have to go look for some of the names that you're inserting.
I'll give you a list. Yeah. You can be a drone.
You can be a drone bee.
Yeah.
So I do want to address Mountain Dream Tarot, partially because it's in my mind got its own following. People might know this work and might know none of your other work. And some people know your other work and have never heard of Mountain Dream Tarot. And I find that to be a really interesting dichotomy, that this thing has a life of its own outside of your artistic practice as well as inside of your artistic practice.
Yeah.
So this is a card deck for those who haven't been able to see it in person. That is a photographic tarot. There's a physical one that SF MoMA has collected in San Francisco. MoMA has that kind of the original collage, actual cards.
And the Beinecke Library has the complete ones. MoMA has a travel pack that had about 15 of them.
And
there's
then,
78 cards, yeah.
And then you printed it in 800 copies, right?
Yeah.
And then you've now gone into 2 other printings, and I have one here,
Okay.
where you've reproduced it in a more updated version, that so people can still buy it. And that to me is fascinating, that this particular thing just kind of evolves on its own. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and kind of its popularity?
Yeah, there's a lot of YouTube videos. We don't have a lot of time, obviously, this time to go into it. But if you're curious about this thing, there's this project. If you enter my name on YouTube, you're going to find all sorts of videos, as well as a very good video of me reading the book Place, which is one of my graveyard books there. So that's further homework you can have. Okay, the tarot deck started, its 50th birthday is the 4th of July this year. With me taking a self-portrait, I think it might be in the second slide here, Jamie, if you go one more in, that portrait.
The one that's behind me?
Yeah. On the front porch of a building at Penland School, modeling this dress with the stars. It's a black taffeta dress with little white stars. And I don't think I immediately knew that I was doing a tarot deck. I just wanted these self-portraits. But within a very short while, I realized I wanted to do that. I wanted to ask other people to model for me. That's why it's called Mountain Dream Tarot, because I must have figured that out in my sleep and didn't even know it. Took the portraits, then started working even before lunch, getting other people lined up to model for me. Now, this was done before Photoshop, so I always joke that if something was on fire, it was on fire. And if you needed 3 mugs for the women to hold, you had to go out and physically find 3 mugs. And this is a good pairing here, the Queen and King, that's my husband. He's got it's a pot lid, an enamel white lid that I'd cut a black star and stuck it in. And then the one in my lap, because I didn't know I was the Queen of Stars when I took that picture, is painted on the print as an afterthought. So there's a combination of finding props, finding people, waiting until I could rent a boat for one image and so forth. It took me 5 years to finish the first deck.
Right. One of the questions that we have relates to Mountain Dream Tarot, and she's asking that when she sees the Mountain Dream Tarot for sale, some of the cards are quite different from the original work.
Yeah, they
so I'm
are.
gonna hold one of those up. This is your daughter Rachel as the page here of Cups.
Yeah.
And I'll find the one of Gavin as well. But so can you talk a little bit about modifying your original one into the available formats and how you changed them?
It's evolved. This is the very valuable deck. This one is worth a lot of money if you can find one. But when it was gone, it was gone. And then another decade passed, and I found them on eBay at that point or something, and I realized they were probably still going to sell. And I thought, well, I'll make another set. And that point, I had the opportunity to add, that's not Gavin, but that's another young guy. Gavin is the swords.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could add my kids who were 20. And this is me as the Queen. I was about 23, 24 in that picture. And so they appear in the second edition that I produced. And then that's Gavin. And then when that deck sold out, that was offset, also printed on a printing press. I found that I could get card decks printed in China. And so I got a little carried away with a third edition, digitally produced one. And I did a lot of photoshopping. And my idea was to make it look like the hand-colored deck that I had originally done.
People can see that.
It more or less did, but I think in a way I killed the vintage naive character in that third deck. So I've kind of removed that one from circulation, although there's some out there. And I've produced one now that I call the commemorative deck. And it's been scanned from the original prints that I made in 1975 and kept monochromatic, like what we're looking at here on the screen, and not manipulated any more than I did have to change the aspect ratio, because that's just a fact of life. That's the way these cards are produced now. It would be extremely expensive to make them short and squat like the first edition. So yeah, there you're looking at a fairly skinny version of this other card. I had to Photoshop my foot, I think, to bring it back into the frame, but I didn't do too much fooling around. Yeah, if you notice, there's no way a foot could follow up to that knee. It's kind of like a medieval painting in that way. Things don't connect.
Right. Nick,
So
did you
that's what's available right now. My website is offline during the pandemic. I'm seeing if I can come up with a way to put it back up and find an alternate way to ship. So if people are interested, they can contact me. I'll put you on a list and we'll get you one. And the same is true with any of my books that are still in print. I'm close to putting my web store back online, but I haven't done it yet.
So, Bea, question came in. Did you think of yourself as an iconoclast, or were you more trying to explore your own vision and approach to photography, rejecting the status quo, or simply seeking new directions?
You know, I never thought of myself as, I called the book Breaking the Rules, the one so many people learned alternative processes from, because I kept being told that that's what I was doing. I didn't see what the big deal was, because I was trained as a painter. My MFA is in painting, and I couldn't, it didn't bother me to paint on a photo or sew it on a sewing machine or tear it up, but it did bother some people. So I guess I was seen that way.
And another question is, I'd love to know how you learned about bookmaking over the years and whether you had any teachers.
Yeah. I mainly went to workshops, and you can find them now. They're all over the place, but at first they weren't as common. It's a phenomenon now. Lots of people are binding books. There's, of course, lots of ways you can go online and look at YouTube videos that'll show you how to do things, but the organization that I really love is Paper and Book Intensive. They have these workshops every summer, but places like Penland teach book binding workshops. There are 3-day workshops. There's weekend workshops all over the country. And I started by going to them. I started by going to a few at Columbia College, which is in Chicago up the road from me. And I was a student, and I love being a student. I learned a lot.
So there was a question that came in. Someone had commented, I graduated from Tyler in 1967, had an amazing education, but a terrible experience being a woman in that art milieu. Can you comment on how you had the courage to create such powerful art about women in that era?
That's a really good question. Because, and it's addressed in the book, the monograph. I mean, there's a picture there. Me when I was a teacher at RIT, for example, my second teaching job, and there were 2 women and 48 men that taught photography. That's just the way it was. I was raised with brothers, and I did just about everything they did, and never was told I couldn't. So I had good parents. I mean, I couldn't go out by myself in the middle of the night. You know, there were certain constraints, but by and large, if I wanted to go fishing, I could go fishing. I could do things that the boys could do. I learned to work with power tools from my dad. I had a real range of tricks up my sleeve. And then I've already mentioned my mother. My mother was incredibly adept at getting what she wanted done in a very polite and quiet way. And she was an older woman, and I could see the trouble. She had far more difficulty than I did, my goodness, you know, much more prejudice, but she accomplished quite a bit in her life. And she was my role model more than any teacher. I never had a woman teacher in studio. not a single one, 6 years of college. They just weren't there.
So would you say a lot of that courage came from your upbringing?
Yeah, my family, my upbringing. That's true.
So
I also had a grandmother who was very frustrated in her artistic, my mother's mother, her artistic bent, and she turned her living room into just a crazy mess. There was a sewing machine always set up in the dining room, and she was very messy, for one thing. And so and she showed me how you could sew Clorox bottles together with, you know, needle and thread, and sew books on sewing machines. She showed me a lot of tricks too. They were always kind of crafty, but I could see that these things could be done.
I also feel in the conversations that we've had that some of the things that you worked and rubbed against are more than just being a woman in what was a very male-dominated field at that time, but also being a painter who turned to photography, being a printmaker who turned to photography, being a photographer who turned to bookmaking and printmaking, and really struggling against all of those different things coming together to make your work. So to me, it becomes much more than just being a woman in that space. It's also, you know, for instance, when you're at the at grad school at IU, you know, being a photographer who starts making collages and painting on things and making that kind of work gets you kicked out of the dark room.
Yeah, it's true.
You have to look for other spaces to make your work, but I love that you always stuck by that, and that to me is part of the tale that I wanted to be sure others heard. Mm-hmm. Through this exhibition and through our book project, that was recorded. And I think that Amy Powell's essay in the book does a really great job of talking about some of those times that you rubbed up against institutions and others, and had to overcome some of those things that people fight against and to make their career happen.
Yeah.
I think this is a good time for we have one more question, and this I think is going to be a great one to end on. Bea, what was it like working with Jamie and others on the retrospective exhibition? How was it to review your life's work at this point?
Well, and I want to give Olivia Las Gonzalez credit here for also her part in the exhibition and the book project. Really important that she was our collaborator in this.
Absolutely. Olivia and I were the ones that first started talking about it, and it was just talk for a very long time, and then eventually we decided to go, and Amy Powell here in my town had sort of gotten an interest in it, so with the 3 women on board, things began to move. Jamie did a studio visit on her own, and then many other visits, and Jamie, I wish your show had been able to stay up a whole lot longer, because you worked so hard on it. To have the museum closed during a large part of it was very disappointing. And I appreciate all the scrambling you especially have done to try to make it available to people.
Yeah, it's available online as a virtual tour.
It's supposed to go to the Cranert, but it's going to be later than planned and longer than planned if all goes
open at the end of October, hopefully at the Cranert.
Yeah, for 4 months instead of 3.
But but getting back to the question.
Yeah, well, I had to sort of let you guys pick what you liked. I mean, it wouldn't always be necessarily the image that I would pick, but it was interesting, and they were so astute and so sharp. They'd catch me using the same negative 3 different times over like decades. Oh, isn't that the same one you used? And I don't even think about it, but it's nice to have another set of eyes on your work.
How was it for you, Bea, to review, to be in the space, to see all of that come together?
Oh, it was fun. It was great. It was. I mean, I've done a book. I tried. I'm behind the times here, but I put this book together called The Skirted Garden, and it's up to 45 years of work. But so I've been sort of keeping this stuff in mind, trying to write things down. Otherwise, I'd never remember what all this stuff was or when it was done. And it's been, that was challenging to do, but it sure helped a lot in putting the show together.
It did help a lot. And I have to say that it's pretty golden when you're working with an artist who's such a good record keeper.
Mhm.
Yeah, really Bea is amazing at knowing where her work is and keeping track of everything that she's done. It's been really a pleasure to work with you and with Olivia and with Amy on these projects. So that's about what we have time for today.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you once again to Bea for allowing us to share your work in so many different ways with a very wide public now. It's been a real pleasure, and we'll look forward to being at the Cran Art Museum this October through January with the exhibition, if all goes well. And also to everyone who attended today, and Nick and Kate for making all these programs possible, even though sometimes some of them are hidden behind the scenes. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.